Hello, everybody.
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
You got it, doing. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. I am your co-host, Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend here, Charles.
Oh, I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend too, man. Today's the day. Here's the moment we are in. It's very exciting.
We're doing it.
And not only are we doing it, but we are making it a very Denna episode. What could be better?
Well, you're preaching to the choir with that one, Charles.
It's been a long time since we finished our buddy read of the Kingkiller Chronicles, and we feel like there's so much that we need to say and so much that we need to repeat to all the fans out there about Kingkiller. It's been too long.
Well, Charles, I love how you led with repeat. It's like my worry with this episode is it's going to be a rehash of my rant on Denna in the Name of the Wind episode, our buddy read discussion of that book that came out a while back. And I just re-listened to that one to try to make sure that I don't repeat myself too much. And I also realized at one point I literally spoke for 10 minutes straight about defending Denna, so I'll try not to rehash that here.
I like to see the passion. I feel like the Kingkiller Chronicles for us is one of the books that we have the most passionate opinions about that we've covered so far, and it's certainly one of the most passionately discussed in the world of fantasy online anyway, in the communities that we try to be a part of. So we thought, it's time to talk more about Kingkiller, and it's time to focus on one of the more talked about characters. And the name of this episode is In Defense of Denna. No surprise to anybody that has listened to the show, especially those last Kingkiller episodes, that we are pro Denna, and we just wanted to take a moment to dedicate ourselves to this discussion of why we're pro Denna and kind of share our point of view. Not to say that we're obviously objectively right or anything, but this is what we feel. This is the opinion that we wanted to make sure was heard throughout the internet communities out there in the fantasy world.
I appreciate you saying all of that, Charles. I definitely, before I start screeching over here about how Denna's a good character, I definitely, while I'm still composed, want to say exactly what you were saying, Charles. We're not trying to claim that any of this is objectively right. We just both subjectively really like Denna as a character. We really like the Kingkiller Chronicle as a series, and I think this is aptly named In Defense of Denna because it does feel like, to me, at least with the dominant feelings on our fantasy and a lot of these other communities that we try to get involved with whenever we can that talk fantasy, Charles, it feels like you're automatically on the defense when you're talking about a character like Denna. There's so much hate that goes her way that it's like, no, it's just us talking here, Charles, and we're both pro Denna, so yes. It's interesting that it already feels like we're on the defense.
Right. It's a nice little vacuum that we can kind of share our opinions on, and then feel free to share your thoughts after you've heard this episode on social media at the FTF Podcast or the FTF Podcast #1 on Twitter. So, we're hoping to just kind of give our piece in this nice condensed episode, summarize everything we wanted to talk about Denna, if such a thing is possible, and put it out there in the world.
definitely. And I think the best place to start here, Charles, is that quote from Patrick Rothfuss that I read on our Name of the Wind episode. But in case you haven't heard that, or even if you have, I think it's just great to hear it again to frame this conversation. Is Patrick Rothfuss said, "Some days I feel like Denna is the best character I've ever written because different people feel different ways about her, and they can justify their beliefs with passages from the text. Some days I feel like Denna is my greatest failure as an author because I haven't brought her to you as clearly as I sometimes wish to. Some days I just really want a donut."
Very Patrick Rothfussian of him.
Very true.
And yeah, for sure. I think, it's been a while since there's been any news on when this third book's coming out, and Rothfuss hasn't really been commenting on it. He's been radio silent, and I think just all of these kind of opinions have been stewing for so long, and now people are more and more starting to express their least favorite parts of the book, and I think now it's just almost become the popular opinion amongst people sharing thoughts on the internet. And it's like Rothfuss said, it's like people are so charged about Denna, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? Did I write her well or not? And Dylan, do you want to go ahead and let's start with our discussion, sharing some of our thoughts? I feel like you're the champion of our Denna discussions.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I am out there on social media and stuff like that, trying to politely engage in a conversation about Denna. It is our top-rated Reddit comment of all time, Charles.
Wow.
On the FDF podcast account is defending Denna with 236 upvotes. I'm very proud that if you search by top on the FDF podcast Reddit account, I'm very proud that a comment in favor of Denna has been able to reach that for us. So, yeah, I'm out there defending, for the record, that was only able to become a top comment for us because it was in response to a thread that asked who's a character you love that everyone else hates. I responded with, "I love Denna, and unlike Quoth, I'm not afraid to say it," before I went in. Yeah. Before I went in on some of my opinions. But I do think, Charles, that another important way to frame a conversation about Denna that I've been thinking about, and this was inspired by one of our friends on Twitter, who said that Denna is a good character but not a great person. I'm paraphrasing that. And I think that's something that people tend to conflate when it should be distinguished, is that people are oftentimes just leveling these broad critiques at Denna, and this makes her a bad character, when sometimes they're just feeling like she's a person they don't like or wouldn't want to spend time with or be friends with or whatever. And it's interesting, a lot of that does get thrown on her when it's like, I don't see that getting thrown on, let's say, a Glocta from Abercrombie's First Law series, who's he's a torturer and does some really messed up things. I won't spoil any of that. But from the start, he's a torturer, and people, I don't feel like there's lots of people who feel like they want to be friends with or like Glocta as a person, but people seem to be able to say, well, but he's a great character, which he is. I mean, Joe Abercrombie, it's awesome characters. Right. So I feel like Denna, for some reason, there's this like, I think she's fickle and flaky and unreliable. It's like, so does Rothfuss. It's like, and I think that that's part of who she is, and she's a really realistically written character for a teenager in that world. And she has a lot of positive and redeeming qualities, I think, as well. And like real people, flaws. And I think that's part of what makes her a good character.
That's so true. The distinction between character as a character in a book and her personality is an important one. And I feel like a lot of the reason Kingkiller Chronicle specifically is so controversial is that distinction between the character and the personality is so blurred just in the way that Rothfuss chooses to tell the story. Right? Even with Quoth, who's also a very controversial character in the books, in the popular conversation about these books, is because people don't like that he's so smug and overconfident and seemingly good at everything, but it's like his personality is someone who would like oversell his story, and his arrogance is actually what makes him disliked by everyone in the actual book that he's dealing with. So Rothfuss is very unique in when he writes fantasy about how he portrays his characters, and like you kind of sometimes when you're reading forget that sense of perspective, and it's easy to kind of blur the lines between character and personality, but you're like, oh, I see what Rothfuss is doing here. He's not letting us behind the curtain of Denna at all, and we only get these fleeting glimpses of her from a very biased perspective. And like many discerning readers need to kind of unpack that a bit. It's like, okay, does that make her good or not? Does that make her a good character or not? And I think a lot of people are in love with that idea, and some people are like, it's just kind of not for me, kind of frustrating, honestly. And I think that's what creates such an intense debate amongst a lot of different discussions about Kingkiller.
Well said, Charles. Yeah, I think I talked some about how I get pretty strong feelings while reading those chapters, some of which are frustration, some of which are feeling sad and almost grief for what feels like a doomed relationship between Quoth and Denna, given that we know where Quoth ends up in the frame story. Almost grief. And I feel like all of those negative emotions that I'm feeling while I'm reading this are part of what makes Denna and her relationship with Quoth so good for me. Like,
right.
It makes me feel so strong, and that's what Rothfuss is getting at. Like, it makes me feel so strongly, and I could say, hey, this makes me feel in a way I don't like to feel. I don't like to feel frustrated, and say that makes her bad. Or I can say, wow, this character is eliciting such a reaction out of me, and in a way that Rothfuss intends her to, that I feel like it's good.
100%. I think that's why a lot of people that like this Denna Quoth relationship are defending Denna in a lot of cases. It's this awkward start-stop courtship that, from this reader's perspective, you almost pull your hair out. It's like you guys are clearly into each other, like just tell each other already. But it's so painfully like awkward, and there's so much insecurity going on between Quoth and Denna that's not like expressed directly in the narrative, but it's what happens as Rothfuss is writing it, and that can either come off as frustrating, or for some people it can people can relate to it, as we've mentioned on our show before. It's like it's a relatable relationship, and in that cases we actually have very strong emotions when we see it so honestly portrayed. And Rothfuss just commits to it throughout two very long books. Like Denna pops in and pops out,
exactly,
and it's always awkward, and it's always this insecurity, and it's always kind of frustrating. And like even Rothfuss himself kind of makes fun of that in the second book when Quoth sees a similar relationship. He's like, why don't they just tell them they're in love already? And then it's Tempe's like, no, to tell them that would be like trying to put out fire with your bare hands. It's like it's not worth the trouble. And even Quoth doesn't understand it when it's happening to him. So Rothfuss's commitment to that over two books is such a unique relationship in fantasy that I've read so far, and it's one that I can relate to in some ways, and I respect so much his ability to not be like, but they were too insecure and so much was left unsaid between them. It's like, no, he's playing it out, and then she leaves and come back. So for some readers, it's like, oh, here we go, another Denna scene where nothing's gonna happen. It's gonna be annoying. But for some people, it's like, oh no, like I got that lump in my throat again. Here we go. So it's just. To me, it's what makes Denna worth defending. I mean, it's such a great, honest portrayal of a relationship, and it doesn't need to be explicitly laid out how awkward it is at all.
Charles, you make such great points there, and it reminds me of two things that I want to talk about. One of which is that there's a whole nother level of ways people criticize Denna that you seem to be touching on, which is more as like what she brings out in Quoth, like criticism of Denna via I don't like how Quoth acts around Denna. And we can talk more about that for sure. And then there's this other piece you're bringing up about people who can relate to the way it's difficult for Quoth to interact with Denna, or just like someone like Denna can be frustrating to deal with. And even when I was preparing for this episode, I was seeing people, I was trying to see, okay, what is it that people are saying? If I'm going to defend Denna, I should get an idea what I'm defending her against. And a pretty surprising number of the criticisms of Denna were, she reminds me of like someone I knew in college who was like this and like that. And it does feel like, okay, well, that's a critique of her as a person. Maybe you don't like those qualities, but not necessarily something that makes her a bad character that she reminds you of someone. In fact, maybe she's pretty realistic of a character if she reminds so many people of people they know.
Right. She's like such a relatable character that people can transfer their complicated feelings towards what it reminds them of onto Denna as a character. Yeah, for sure.
Definitely. And Charles, I do want to talk some about this criticism of Denna and what she brings out in Quoth.
All right.
So I usually see that framed in this there's basically two ways, and they seem pretty opposite of each other. Some people seem to feel that when Denna is around Quoth, it brings out this insecure, annoying, sappy side of Quoth that takes away from this person who is so good at everything, so then they don't like to see him floundering with someone.
Right.
And then it seems like the other side is that some people see Denna as representing someone who is just there to show how great Quoth is, because she's described by Quoth, let's be frank here, as so perfect in every way. And it's just this other moment of, oh, of course, Quoth as so like someone who's so great at everything has the most perfect love interest.
Yeah.
And it feels like she's taken these, people are firing shots at her from both angles here.
But we know from Bass that she has, was it a crooked nose?
A crooked nose. Yeah. But she does have great, what does Bass say? That she
little
has perfect
ears or something?
Perfect.
Oh,
ears,
perfect ears? Okay.
Yeah.
So, there you go. Yeah, no, I agree. I feel like people, when they see Quoth and Denna together, they're kind of, they see that Quoth is acting differently, and they can be kind of annoying, and then you kind of transfer that, like when Quoth is just fixated on this Denna person, and you've spent so much time with Quoth, you're like, can we just move on from this? I don't like who you are when you're around her, which is what all of his friends are like. That Will is like, okay, have we done enough for this chick yet? Can we please move on? Like, how much longer does it have to be that we have to put up with this? So again, like, Rothfuss's willingness to commit to that, it is definitely irks people, but it also rings out so honestly for her personality. It's like, we don't like who Quoth is necessarily when he's with her, but that's not necessarily her fault, and that's not necessarily something we need to fixate on Denna about. It's just the nature of Quoth as a person in his relationship, and Denna as a person and when they're together. So super interesting dynamic there. I will also say that, like, a part of what makes Denna so annoying is the fact that where everything is told through Quoth's perspective, and Quoth is the main character. I feel like what Rothfuss is playing towards is that we're learning more and more about Denna, and the story would be totally different if told from Denna's perspective. That's just kind of the feeling that I'm getting from all of this. So I definitely think Denna does not benefit from just randomly popping up in Quoth's life and being annoying and disappearing, but there's something going on there that I think fans kind of want to see more of, or maybe, we're wishing there was more of, but that's just not what Quoth gets to see and gets to interact and gets to feel. So I think that's a huge part of it as well.
Well, this is a classic thing that defenders of Denna often go to, I think, which is that we are in Quoth's point of view.
Yeah.
And we see Denna as this person who Quoth is searching for all the time, and just, as you say, Charles, pops in and out of Quoth's life. But I was keeping track of this during our buddy read of the Kingkiller Chronicle, because I knew to look out for it, having already read the books and seen all the conversation on it. And if any of our listeners do go back and read this, keep an eye on how frequently it is Denna that finds Quoth and not vice versa. She is constantly tracking down Quoth. I would say that she finds Quoth much more often than he finds her, and there's also lines where she explicitly says that she has trouble finding him and is looking for him constantly. So I think it's very easy for us from Quoth's point of view to see Denna in a certain way where she's the one that can never be found. But yeah, if this book was written from Denna's point of view, we might all really feel that way about Quoth.
Exactly, because we're largely in the dark about who Denna is. And I think the fact that she's this mystery while also being this, like, will they, won't they love interest makes it harder to empathize with her. But if you look at what's going on and what Rothfuss is showing and not showing, and like you said, like, how many times is Denna actually the one that finds Quoth? It's like her personality is definitely more complex when you look at the bigger picture and kind of get outside of Quoth's perspective. It's like, yeah, she is kind of tracking him down, and she is doing all these things, and Quoth the one is the one sometimes it's not reciprocating, and so it's easy to, from Quoth's perspective, from what little we know about Denna, to kind of write her off. But I think what a lot of Denna fans do enjoy about her is kind of this mystery, as well as this honest portrayal of an awkward relationship. So that's why I'm all on board, and I'm like super excited to see where it goes. And I have a feeling what Denna's been doing on her downtime when she's not awkwardly flirting with Quoth is gonna be something that we're gonna learn more about in the final chapter here, if we ever get it. And I'm super excited to see how it all comes together, because Rothfuss has been so committed to keeping us in the dark on this. Frustrating to some people, but like still very exciting to see where it goes.
I agree with you, Charles, and I'll say what you're saying now has a little bit of a feel of like, oh, are we winding down here? But Charles, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to wind down. I've got more. So
I'm not going to stop you, man. We're here to defend Denna however long it takes. We got to do it. This is our piece.
So, yeah, I mean, first off, like you were saying before, Charles, this stuff about what Denna's doing and her downtime, I think some of what she's doing is stuff that is really pretty nice stuff. Like she is clearly trying to help. This is a little more defending Denna as a person than as a character, but she is trying to help people. We do get a glimpse into that in book 2.
Yeah, where she like takes that girl off the streets and feeds her and gives her advice. And
exactly,
yeah.
and she does buy Quoth the most expensive thing that he owns.
Yeah, the case,
and gifts that to him, the loot case. So she I think people frame her often as this very manipulative person who just uses people, and maybe we will get some reveal in book 3 where it turns out she was doing all of that, but I don't think we can say that with confidence 2 books in. She does do a lot of things that are kind and helpful, but of course she has plenty of flaws too. And yeah, I want to double down, Charles, as you talk about these awkward uh, awkward interactions between Denna and Quoth. They
Right.
are teenagers. They are
Yes.
teenagers.
Yes.
Let's stop and think about that for a little bit. Like, Charles, we knew each other as teenagers.
For sure.
And we know we can both relate to how awkward and bumbling these interactions with someone that you have a crush on can be at that age. And I think, yeah, part of what makes these painful to relive, but part of what makes these such well-written interactions.
100%. It's going back to like the relationship and what makes it so relatable. And like Quoth for the longest part is like his Achilles heel has kind of been interacting with women. You know, his social cues around women aren't that strong from like a relationship perspective. And you know, he kind of doesn't know what to do with Denna for a long time. And all those things, one of the rare moments of vulnerability for Quoth's character, especially in the beginning, because there's a whole other conversation we could have about Quoth being a Mary Sue and all this, that, and the other thing. But certainly one of his vulnerabilities is Denna in a larger picture, how he has more meaningful relationships with people, especially with women, and it's kind of telling to his character. All very honest, interesting things that Rothfuss does. And look, I mean, do you want another like love story where they get together and all this other stuff, or do you want like a dynamic, ongoing, complicated, largely platonic thing that, you know, it's just interesting and it's different and it's real? And that's what I keep coming back to when I'm defending Denna. It's like, it's a different, honest portrayal of a character. Like, come on, what more do you want? Do you want the same thing over and over? Rothfuss is clearly committed to not doing that. So,
for sure. I mean, I think it's very valid to want this traditional will they, won't they, but they do in the end, and we get the sense that they very much will, and they'll always choose each other when push comes to shove. It's okay to want that for sure.
Right. It's
You're
when
not
Quoth
getting that.
learned to love that he finally was able to tap into his hidden powers and save the day.
Yes.
What?
So, and those relationships are all over the place in fantasy and beyond. So you can find many of those, and if you want to, keep going, right? Keep reading more books with those kind of romances in them. But I think for people like you and me, at least, Charles, who feel like we've had enough portrayals of that and we want something different, it's amazing to have a relationship like Denna and Quoth's that feels different and true.
For sure. And props to Rothfuss for committing to that in the face of like frustrating people. It's like, well, this is the story and this is how it plays out, and buckle down because I wrote a whole second book that does it again. So it's, you know, it's for lack of a better word, brave for an author to kind of double down on those controversies just because that he knows he's being honest to the relationship and to the characters, and I'm sure it will have a large effect on the plot as it continues and all of those things.
Definitely. Well, Charles, I'm feeling that we got most of what we wanted to get out there.
Well, I want to make sure
point.
we've said all of our pieces, and you know you're kind of like the gatekeeper on our hot Denna topics. Is there anything we still need to get into?
Well, I do want to push back against all the negative connotations that come up with gatekeeper, but you know, Charles and I don't gatekeep on here.
No, and like we said at the top before we riled ourselves up, this is just our what were the words we said? It's like, look, this is just our subjective opinions, and we totally understand and respect the opposite end of those opinions. This is just where we're coming from, and we enjoy the discourse. It's always fun to talk about Denna in a safe space. All differences of opinions are always good.
Yeah, no, we love to hear it, and we're very accepting of all that. The only last thing I think we didn't address, Charles, that I see people making a lot of noise about why they don't like Denna is because they think that other characters in the books would be more interesting love interests. And a lot of people say Devi, and I see Fella sometimes, Ari, but Devi seems to come up the most. I'm
like
wondering
Devi.
if you have any thoughts on this.
Devi's the loan shark, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I always liked Devi. I would, there is a bit of flirtation amongst them. I mean, as far as Devi being like, if you ever wanted to knock boost, just come back and hit me up. So it's like interesting in those respects.
Different from Denna.
Yes, and Quoth is just kind of like wide-eyed, like, I gotta go, bye, and runs out the door. So it's interesting, and I always liked that she was kind of left the school, but is very capable, kind of follows along the same arc as Quoth seemed to follow, and so I can see that. I also liked, what was the name of the girl or the woman that he saves from the fire?
Fela,
yeah, I liked her too. So it's like Rothfuss writes a whole bunch of good characters, and there's so many possibilities with all of these characters, and ultimately you can't walk away from Denna for whatever reason, and that's what makes it so much juicier, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have tons of takes per se on this. Like, would other characters be more interesting love interests for Quoth thing? That's part of why I threw that to you, Charles. I just see it all the time. I really like I think, sure, could Rothfuss write an interesting novel focused on Quoth and Davy interacting?
Sure.
Yeah, right?
Right.
But I guess I like the Denna-Quoth interaction so much that I'm reticent to say that I would want anything different.
I'm in the same
that's
boat.
Pretty much it.
I'm in the same boat. I think people are right in that it would be interesting, and I wouldn't mind seeing it, but I think Quoth has to just keep going we have to see where this Denna thing's gonna go.
Yeah.
And I would rather see that than just see him casually dating someone that's interesting and cool. It's like good that you have a girlfriend, but what about this complicated mess over here? Like, this was what we need to see play out, So that's just from my point of view. That's where I'm coming from.
For sure. What we want for Quoth as a character that we're interested in reading about is very different from what we'd want for one of our friends.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, dude, she has her own small business. She's making lots of money. She seems very talented. She's obviously into you. What's the issue here? That other chick is like flaky. She's always, with other people, pursuing patrons, doing her own thing. You need someone stable, I could see that for sure. I could see myself pushing that on people.
Yeah. Well, we won't push that here because we're too focused on defending Denna. And I think if you, Charles, sounds like you're feeling good on where you're at. I'm feeling good for now on where I'm at.
I just want to make sure we covered all the bases. Like, when I said you were the gatekeeper, I only meant that you had all of our ideas written down. I just want to make sure we missed anything. Not that you were the gatekeeper of any opinions, but you were the gatekeeper of our notes on the episode.
Yes, I feel the same, Charles. I knew where you're coming from and just wanted to make sure our listeners heard.
Because we do take notes, we do prepare for these discussions, believe it or not. We formulate our opinions beforehand. And especially when it comes to defending Denna, we don't want to leave any stones unturned. If we're coming out dedicating an episode in defense of Denna, we want to make sure that we have defended her to the best of our abilities. And I think we've certainly done enough. I just don't want to leave anything that we prepared unsaid.
Gotcha. Well, I'll leave everyone with a quote.
Ooh.
Then, Charles, from Kingkiller, which is, Anyone can love a thing because. That's as easy as putting a penny in your pocket. But to love a thing despite, to know the flaws and love them too, that is rare and pure and perfect. And I want to invite y'all to try to love Denna despite.
That is so beautiful. Rothfuss has such a way with words, and I can't think of a better way to end this, guys. You know, the heart wants what the heart wants. All right. So with that very thoughtful quote from Rothfuss, I will bring us into the outro. Thank you, everybody, for listening to us yet again come to the defense of Denna, as written in the Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. If you feel differently about Denna, we'd love to hear it and talk about it. We think you are right and valid, and we would love to pursue that discourse. So be sure to hit us up on social media. We are the FTF Podcast, and we are the FTF Podcast with a number 1 for Twitter. Or send us an email at theftfpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, looking forward to chatting with anyone. And yeah, throw us 5 stars if you liked it. If don't, give us some feedback on how we can improve. We're always looking to improve over here.
That's exactly right. You know, we're always looking to improve. We're always looking at dialogues. And we really love the Kingkiller community. So thank you, everybody, for listening. As always, go forth and conquer, friends.